Have you ever felt like the problem in the room? Like no matter what you do, you're always a little too much, a little too intense, a little too different. They don't say it directly, of course. They joke, they sigh, they roll their eyes. They treat you like a storm in a house that only wants sunshine. But deep down, you've always known you don't fit. Not because you're broken, but because you see. You see the cracks in the facade. You hear the truths they won't say. You feel the weight they pretend not to carry. And so, you become the black sheep, the misfit, the difficult one. But what if I told you that this role you never chose, this burden of being the outlier, is not a flaw, but a calling? What if Carl Jung was right, and your very exile from the family story is the key to something far more important? Because the black sheep isn't just a problem. The black sheep is the truth bearer, the one who carries the ancestral weight no one else dares to feel, the one who bleeds for what the others repress, the one who walks alone because everyone else is asleep. If that hits something raw in you, then listen carefully, because once you understand what's really happening behind this role, you'll never see yourself, your past, or your pain the same way again. In every family, there's a story they won't tell, but that everyone lives. It exists beneath the surface, wrapped in silence, denial, or carefully rehearsed smiles. A hidden script passed down through generations. Pain that was never processed, rage that was never named, shame that was buried so deeply, even those who carry it have forgotten where it began. Carl Jung called this the family shadow, the unconscious reservoir of all the things a system refuses to see in itself. But here's the brutal truth. That shadow doesn't disappear just because it's unspoken. It leaks, it infects, it demands a container, and often that container is a person, not the weakest, not the most problematic, but the most awake, the one whose sensitivity becomes a target, the one who reacts, questions, breaks the rules, or refuses to play along, the one whose mere presence threatens to expose the rot beneath the facade. This person becomes the scapegoat, not by choice, but by unconscious design. Jung knew that what we refuse to integrate in ourselves, we will project onto others. The family, as a collective psyche, does the same. It chooses one member, often the most emotionally honest, to wear the sins of the entire system. The black sheep becomes the carrier of ancestral trauma. They are blamed for tension they didn't create, shamed for emotions they didn't invent, labeled as too dramatic, too rebellious, too unstable, when in fact, they are simply mirroring back everything the family refuses to acknowledge. It's not that the black sheep is broken. It's that they are awake in a lineage that has chosen to stay asleep. But this awakening comes with a cost, because to hold the truth that no one else will is to walk through hell with no map, no allies, and often no name for what's happening. And yet, that exile is not meaningless, because in the language of archetypes, the scapegoat is also the initiate, the one who is cast out not to be punished, but to begin a deeper journey, a descent that can, in time, lead to transformation. But to survive that journey, you first have to understand, it's not your shame. It never was. Being cast out hurts, especially when it comes from those who were supposed to love you unconditionally. The wound of family rejection isn't just emotional, it's existential. It tells you, there's something wrong with you. You don't belong here. At first, you try to fix it. You shrink yourself. You perform. You apologize for existing in the way you naturally are. You chase approval like a starving child searching for crumbs of warmth. But it never works, because no matter how much you contort yourself, the narrative has already been written. You are the problem. Until one day, something inside you breaks, not in defeat, but in clarity. You realize you will never be accepted on their terms, and more than that, maybe you shouldn't be. Because what if your exile is not a punishment, but an invitation? What if being cast out of the tribe is not the end of your story, but the beginning of your real one? Carl Jung spoke of the process of individuation, a psychic journey of becoming whole. And like all initiatory paths, it begins with separation, with descent, with rupture. You leave the familiar, not because you want to, but because the truth you carry can no longer survive in a system that denies it. This is not just psychology, this is myth. The exile is an archetype. Moses left Egypt, Buddha left his palace, Christ was rejected in his hometown. In every sacred story, the one who eventually brings wisdom to the world must first pass through the wilderness, alone, unseen, misunderstood, and so must you. Because the black sheep is not just rejected from the family. They are being prepared by life, by psyche, by something ancient and intelligent within, to confront what no one else could, to enter the underworld of their own soul. And in that underworld, something sacred begins to take form, but only if you dare to go all the way in, past the fear, past the guilt, past the illusion that you were ever the problem to begin with. There's a reason you feel heavy. It's not just your own pain you've been carrying. It's the weight of generations, unspoken grief, unlived lives, desires that were repressed and handed down like poisoned heirlooms. And somewhere along the line, it landed on you. Not because you were weak, but because you were open. You felt what others refused to feel. You questioned what others blindly accepted. You cracked under pressure, not because you were fragile, but because you refused to go numb. And that refusal was the first act of shadow work. Carl Jung taught that the shadow is everything we reject in ourselves, but it's not limited to the individual. Families, cultures, entire societies create collective shadows, traits they demonize, truths they bury, realities they deny, and those shadows don't vanish. They are pushed underground and then projected onto rebels, onto misfits, onto anyone who refuses to play along. That's why the black sheep feels like a lightning rod for tension, for blame, for emotional chaos. It's not because they cause it, it's because they reflect what others are unwilling to face. But here's the paradox. The very thing that isolates you is also your gift. Because once you recognize the shadow, once you stop internalizing it and begin to study it, work with it, integrate it, you start becoming what Jung called the wounded healer, the one who transforms inherited pain into conscious presence, the one who says, "This ends with me." But this path is not noble in the beginning. It's brutal. At first, you feel insane. You wonder if maybe you really are the problem. You rage, you break down, you spiral. But every descent is a doorway. And if you stay with it, if you keep breathing through the emotional storms, keep peeling back the false layers, you'll begin to find pieces of yourself you didn't even know you had lost. Anger, that's actually clarity. Grief, that's actually love. Fear, that's actually power. Because the shadow doesn't just hold what's dark, it holds what was buried in order to survive. And the black sheep, the exile, the outcast, is often the only one brave enough to dig it back up. Let's say it out loud. They needed you to be the problem. They needed someone to carry the dysfunction, someone to absorb the chaos, someone to point to and say, "There's what's wrong with this family." So they never had to look at themselves. You became that someone, not because you were broken, but because your presence threatened the system. You felt too much. You asked too many questions. You didn't adapt like they wanted you to. You couldn't wear the mask as easily as they did. And in a system built on repression, silence, and illusion, that makes you dangerous. Carl Jung wrote that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And families, especially ones built on unspoken wounds, are no exception. Instead of healing, they perform. Instead of confronting, they blame. Instead of evolving, they find someone to sacrifice. And if you're the black sheep, you already know what that feels like, to be labeled difficult, dramatic, unstable, when all you were doing was refusing to lie. It's not that they didn't see your pain, it's that your pain made them uncomfortable. Because if your suffering is real, then the system they built to suppress their own is not. You see, the black sheep threatens the entire architecture of denial. Because the moment one person says, "This doesn't feel right," the whole thing begins to crack. So they make you the scapegoat, the unstable one, the ungrateful one, the oversensitive one. But that's not who you are. It's just the role you were assigned, so others could stay asleep. The lie wasn't just told about you, it was told to you, until you started to believe it, until you started to shrink, until you doubted your own perception, your own reality, your own worth. But here's the truth. You were never meant to discover. There was never anything wrong with you. You were simply the one who couldn't lie convincingly enough to make them comfortable. And that is not weakness. It's the beginning of integrity. There is a wound in you. You know where it is. You've carried it for years, maybe your whole life. It pulses in moments of silence. It stings when others dismiss your truth. It aches every time you try to explain something no one else seems to understand. But what if that wound was never meant to be hidden? What if it's not the sign of your failure, but the seed of your transformation? Carl Jung spoke often of the wounded healer, the archetype of someone whose own suffering becomes the bridge to their wisdom. It is not the person who avoided pain who becomes whole. It is the one who walked through it, who let it burn, who let it hollow them out, and then returned with something no one else could bring. The black sheep often becomes the healer of the family system, not because they were the most damaged, but because they were the most honest. Honest enough to break down, honest enough to fall apart, honest enough to say, I can't carry this anymore. And in doing so, begin the work that no one else dared to begin. But healing isn't glorious at first. It's humiliating, lonely, exhausting. You rage against what was done to you. You mourn the love you never received. You grieve the version of yourself that spent years believing they were defective. And slowly, something changes, not outside, but within. You stop needing to be understood. You stop needing to fix them. You stop performing for approval that will never come, because the alchemy has already begun. The same wound that isolated you starts to connect you to something deeper, to a wisdom that doesn't come from books, to a clarity that only comes from having survived the fire and stayed awake through the burning. That's what makes you dangerous now, not your perfection, not your healing certificate, not your performance of, I'm over it. What makes you dangerous is your presence, the depth in your voice when you speak the truth, the steadiness in your gaze when others try to guilt you, the unshakable knowledge deep in your bones that you are no longer willing to carry what was never yours. That is the wounded healer's strength, not because they are invincible, but because they have become real. There comes a moment in every black sheep's life when something breaks that can never be repaired. It's not a fight, not a final conversation, not even a dramatic betrayal. It's quieter than that, more internal. A shift you can't undo. You realize that the people you wanted to save don't want to be saved. You realize the love you kept trying to earn was always conditional. You realize the version of yourself that was shaped to belong in that system was never really you. And something in you, the deepest part, stops pretending. Carl Jung taught that individuation demands separation from the collective, not as a rejection of others, but as a devotion to the truth of the soul. And this moment of betrayal, when you lose the tribe, is sacred. Because before you can belong to yourself, you must be willing to not belong to them, not out of rebellion, not out of resentment, but out of reverence for the truth you carry. The tribe, whether it's family, community, religion, or culture, is built on shared agreements, some of them spoken, many of them not, but all of them powerful. To be part of the tribe, you must uphold the myth. You must act like it didn't happen. You must laugh at what hurt you. You must pretend that silence is peace and that obedience is love. But when you stop doing that, when you speak, when you feel, when you stop apologizing for seeing clearly, you break the pact, and the price is exile. It feels like betrayal, but what it really is awakening. Because when the tribe can no longer define you, you begin to meet someone you've never truly known, yourself. Not the role, not the mask, not the scapegoat, you. And from that place, raw, alone, but finally real, you begin to ask the question the tribe could never answer. Who am I? Without the need to be accepted. And that is where soul begins. Not in the comfort of approval, but in the courage to walk alone, holding nothing but your truth. There's a word the black sheep was never taught how to use. No, not the defiant adolescent no that comes from rebellion, but the sacred, grounded, unwavering no that comes from clarity. Because for most of your life, your worth was tied to your ability to say yes. Yes to being available. Yes to emotional labor. Yes to being the family therapist, the emotional sponge, the invisible glue holding broken pieces together. But that yes was never free. It came with a cost. Your peace, your energy, your identity. Carl Jung said, you are what you do, not what you say you'll do. And for many black sheep, their doing was always in service of maintaining bonds that quietly consumed them. But here's the truth. Every yes to someone else that violates your soul is a no to yourself. And that trade-off slowly kills you. Until one day, you burn out. Not just physically, existentially. You realize that no matter how much you gave, it was never enough. And then something shifts. You no longer want to prove anything. You no longer need to rescue, fix, or explain. You realize your life is not a negotiation. It is a territory, sacred land, and not everyone deserves access. That's when the sacred no is born. It's not loud. It doesn't need justification. It doesn't ask for permission. It simply says, I will not betray myself to maintain illusions. And this no becomes the gatekeeper of your rebirth. It becomes the space where your nervous system can finally breathe, where your soul can stop bracing for impact, where you begin to recover the most valuable thing you ever lost, your life force. Because the truth is, you were never too much. You were simply surrounded by people who expected you to be less than you are, so they wouldn't have to grow. And now, you're done shrinking. You're done explaining. You're done offering parts of yourself to people who only love the version of you that makes them comfortable. This is where your healing becomes sovereign. This is where your energy stops leaking into the past. This is where you begin, finally, to rebuild. Healing is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you to be someone else. It's about retrieving the fragments you buried, the ones that were too wild, too soft, too strange, too honest, and realizing they were never flaws. They were keys. Carl Jung called this the process of integration, the merging of your conscious self with all the parts you disowned, rejected, or were told to suppress. It's not about fixing what's broken. It's about becoming whole. Because here's what no one told you. You were never just the black sheep. You were the one who saw, the one who felt what others denied, the one who bled for truths no one else could carry, the one who refused to abandon their inner world, even when the outer world made you pay for it. That wasn't dysfunction. That was the beginning of your individuation. And now, as you walk forward, you begin to gather all the scattered parts, the anger that became boundaries, the grief that became depth, the loneliness that became clarity, the betrayal that became discernment. What once felt like emotional ruin now becomes sacred architecture. You are building a life not from survival, but from sovereignty, not to prove your worth, but to embody it. And it's not loud, it's not performative, it's not for them, it's for you, for the part of you that always knew, even in your darkest nights, that there was more to your pain than just suffering. There was a message, there was a medicine, there was a path that only you could walk, and a truth that only you were meant to carry. And now, you're carrying it, not as a wound, but as a power. This is what it means to integrate, to stop fighting your story and start living it. The journey of the black sheep does not end in exile. It ends in return. But not a return to be embraced, not a return to ask for validation, not a return to be understood. It's the return of someone who no longer needs those things, because now you carry something far more powerful than approval. You carry truth. Carl Jung taught that true individuation demands that we return to the world, not as who we were, but as who we've become, and that return is not always welcomed. Some will still see you through the old lens. They'll project the same stories, call you the same names, try to provoke the same wounds, but they no longer reach you because you are not the same. You are not performing anymore. You are not trying to fix them. You are not shrinking to make them feel safe. You've grieved what never was. You've buried what needed to die. And now, you live rooted in what is real. You've become the one who holds the mirror, not to punish, not to shame, but to reflect what's been avoided for generations. And this, perhaps, is your final task, to walk among those who once called you broken and not forget who you are, to hold your center even when they can't see it, to live your truth so fully, so gently, so powerfully, that you don't need to convince anyone of anything. Your energy speaks now. Your clarity speaks now. Your silence speaks now. Because this is what they tried to bury. Not your rebellion, not your defiance, but your presence. And now, it's back. Unapologetic, undeniable, whole. You were never the wound. You were always the witness. You were never the problem. You were always the path. You've walked through the silence. You've sat with the weight of everything they didn't say, everything they projected, everything they feared and tried to make yours. You've felt the cost of being awake in a world that asked you to sleep, and still, you're here, clearer, heavier, perhaps, but more real than ever. You are not who they said you were. You are not what they made you carry. You are not the dysfunction. You are the mirror. You are not the problem. You are the pattern breaker. And now, you get to decide, not how they see you, not how they remember you, but how you will live from here. Because while they buried the truth in shame, silence, and performance, you brought it back to the surface, breathing, speaking, alive. This is your turning point. Not dramatic, not loud, but permanent. From now on, you move differently. You don't need to fight to be seen. You don't need to prove you're good. You don't need to shrink for peace that isn't real. You are no longer trying to belong. You belong to yourself now. And hey, if you've been feeling stuck in emotional loops, struggling with inner conflict, or sensing there's a part of you you've never fully understood, you're not alone in that. This guide we've put together dives deep into exactly that. It'll help you understand why certain patterns keep repeating, face the hidden parts of yourself you've been avoiding, begin real emotional healing and self-integration, reconnect with your true, undiluted self. If any of that speaks to something you've been quietly carrying, check the first pinned comment under this video. It might be exactly what your soul has been needing. No pressure, no rush, just when you're ready.